Welcome to my account review. Before we start, I'd like to say that you shouldn't use my account as benchmark or guide. I build my heroes with only one purpose for certain situations. They aren't meant to be flexible like others where you can take them into any team. So, take my builds with a grain of salt, as objectively speaking this is a very bad account. Now, I've posted this in my YouTube community, but in case you missed it, yes, I managed to win a seat in Emperor, or rather lose my way to it. And I'll be explaining the heroes that I used to get said rank. First, we are going to cover the Cleavers. Let's start with Pavel. He's one of the heroes I used the most in Epic 7. Looking at his build, you might notice some things are weird, mainly his speed and the artifact. If you've seen my videos, you will know why I put Proof of Valor on him. It's because of this particular slime. Having Proof of Valor allows me to ignore most Rimuru S2. As for the speed, we'll talk about it later after I covered everyone in my Cleave team. Challenger Dominil. I know, you must be tearing your hair out looking at that free level 75 gears, but hear me out. She is a really low investment hero. With only these gears, she can one-shot most heroes in the game. She's just that good. So, I see no reason to put something better on her when she already does her job perfectly. I also speed-tuned her so she won't cut 260 speed with only 4 critical attacks. She was made this way so I can guarantee a one-shot on any hero when she moves. Usually, I can stack around 5 to 9 of her passive, which deals a really huge damage. This also correlates as to why I put attack set and not destruction set. At 5 stacks and more plus attack buff, she deals more damage on high attack than 350% critical damage. Having attack set also allows me to kill through evasion units, as she can do up to 13k on a miss. The fact that she also has critical chance imprint is why I don't put 100% CC on most of my Cleavers, because let's be real, 9 out of 10 people aren't going to ban her. Politis. This girl has always been and will always be my first pick in draft phase. There are 2 reasons why I do that. 1. I can't deal with her. If she's on the opponent's side, a lot of my heroes automatically became unusable. 2. She's really strong in my team. Be it anti-cleave or cleave, she does something just by standing around. Let's talk about her build. She's on destruction set, and fairly slow, because, simply said, I don't need her to move at all. I just need her to stand around to deter the opponent's CR pushes and does as much damage as she can with her S2 if possible. By having her in my team, I can ignore the possibility of CR cut by Rimuru, S-Bal, Delibert or other similar heroes. Which plays a huge role in my target priority. Operator Sigrid. If you are wondering where my ran goes, I stripped him of his gear and gave it to this hero. So, right now, this is officially the fastest hero that I have. There's only one reason why I use her instead of Ran. It's because of a certain lost amputee who came from another world. Edward just cooked my Ran so bad as one misplaced debuff on my Cleavers and it'd be insta-lose, so I opted for an opener without debuff instead. I choose Operator Sigrid for that because she has team-wide attack buff, and strip that could ignore ER if the opponent has barrier. And we all know how popular FCC is against Cleavers. So, she's a really nice complement to Challenger Dominil and my next hero. Caesarea. Immediately you will notice that her attack is oddly low while her effectiveness is really high. Again, there are several reasons why I do this. First, let's talk about the attack. I tuned her attack to 4k so that when I use Pavel and Challenger Dominil, the attack buff would go into Challenger Dominil instead. Having low attack also allows me to control heroes that I shouldn't kill, such as something like Daganabi, or Holy Sacrifice T-Crozet need to be controlled instead, as having them dying and reviving would mess up my cleave. Now, the effectiveness. She was built with 216% effectiveness because most anti-cleavers are built with ER these days, ER BBK, ER Kairon, ER S-Bal, and more. Having 216% effectiveness allows me to ignore and control them instead of wasting precious bans in draft phase. This also allows me to control most soul weavers that might cleanse the stun or revive a hero if not all. That's basically it for my cleave team. Two weird things you'd notice looking at them are, their speed are fairly slow, and they are oddly bulky for a cleave team. First we'll talk about the speed. My account isn't one blessed by SG in terms of speed. Even with 129 base speed heroes like Ran, my top speed is only 300. It might seem pretty good, but that's just not the case in RTA, especially in higher ranks. Having only 300 speed means nothing, as the opponent can just ban it and I'd be sitting duck waiting for dead. Not to mention everyone and the grandmother here has 310 speed and they also slam speed imprint heroes along with it. So I thought, why bother? So, instead of focusing on speed contest and losing to gear gap, I decided to only cleave bruises and standard. I'd just pivot to anti-cleave if the opponent decides to race me. Because the term gear gap only exists when you fight using the same kind of team. For example, Cleavers versus Cleavers where outspeed equals win, or Bruiser versus Bruiser where better overall stats equals win. But gear gap doesn't exist when it comes to Cleaver versus Bruiser. There's only, does the cleave setup manage to cleave the whole team? Or does the Bruiser survive the cleave and win? That's why I built my openers with only 260 plus speed. That's really all you need to outspeed bruisers and standards. Most of bruiser drafts only have one speed threat if any, which you can ban. Epic 7 isn't a game where they show the stats of each other's heroes, so if you confidently picked cleave heroes, people would assume they are at least 300 speed. The higher you are, the easier it is to abuse this logic, and 5 out of 10 people wouldn't try to contest you, instead picking anti-cleave heroes. Next we'll talk about the bulk. There are 3 reasons why I put bulk in my cleavers. 1. Ran. A lot of times, standard and bruises would pick Ran in an attempt to outspeed, but without follow-up, and in most cases, these Rans, dubbed real Ran by the community, have enough damage to one-shoot a typical cleave team. So I put just enough bulk in my cleavers to barely survive his S3. This allows me to ignore Ran pick altogether, saving a precious ban for a more dangerous hero. 2. My cleave isn't the one-turn wipe kind. I'm not saying I can't end the game in one turn with my cleave, as you've seen that plenty of times in my videos, but more often than not, they can only burst 2 or 3 heroes on the opponent's side, leaving at least one hero alive. It is especially important to be able to survive heroes that are generally hard to cleave but can still one-shoot your whole team if they move, for example something like Celine. Unless she gabs, my cleave can handle her S3 without any problem. 3. Stray counters. Heroes like Chiron, Meru and other similar heroes are really popular to use against anti-cleave. Hoping for them not to counter is just a bad strategy. Expect them to counter at least once, and being able to survive just a counter can be a matter of winning and losing in Epic 7. That's all about my cleave team. Next we'll move on to bruises, or rather, my anti-cleaves. I mentioned that 5 out of 10 people wouldn't try to contest you, but that means the opposite is also true. 5 out of 10 people would contest you. In which case I pivot to my anti-cleave, which consists of 2 main heroes and 1 situational pick. There are 2 things you need to understand before I talk about my choice of heroes for this team. First, you have to understand the way I draft. I always first pick Politis into Pavel, followed by Challenger Dominil, Caesarea, and Operator Sigrid in normal scenario. But, if the opponent decides to contest me, especially with speed imprints, I would immediately pivot to my anti-cleaves starting from the 3rd pick, or if I see cleave heroes picked early on the other side, I would just skip Pavel altogether, but the logic stands. The second thing is, you need to realize that, to kill a cleaver you don't need 20k damage, all you need is a mere 10k for most of them. Any damage is lethal damage to a cleaver. So, survivability should be your first priority against them, not damage. With that covered, let's start with my first main pick for anti-cleave. You've seen him a lot, you guys love him, I abuse him, it's the one and only Rimuru. If you aren't familiar with my Rimuru, he is built with 0 offensive stats and only bulk with some speed. His job is to tank hits, steal some buffs, cuts, nuke or cripple a threat, and defense break. And more often than not, this target is Cid. Cid is really popular among cleavers in the current meta. One can argue that he is probably more broken than a certain leg lady that will get nerfed soon if you have the right gear for him. With the way I draft, more often than not Politis will be the target of Cid's S3. Whenever Cid kills with S3, he gets an extra turn and some buffs from his passive, which makes Rimuru his second target. A normal build Rimuru would just die from his S1, so I opted for full bulk instead, since he can deal 10k fixed damage anyway. Warhorn, my choice of artifact, also plays a huge role in this, with Cid alone taking 2 turns. If Rimuru didn't cut with S2, he will definitely cut after the second hero moves. My other main pick for anti-cleave is this, resistance build BBK, and probably the only hero I can be proud showing off to other people. She is really strong in current meta, as most cleave today are just damage and speed paired with low effectiveness debuffer. The amount of game she soloed is just baffling. You might be asking, what if they have ignore ER soul burn? Simple, either ban them or put what I call risk heroes. Which brings me to my last pick, or last 2 picks, depends on how soon I pivot. The situational picks. This picks consist of heroes with certain mechanics. Since we are on the topic of ignore ER, we'll start with 3 of my most picked heroes against ER ignoring skills. The first one is Edward. He's really nice to use when you are up against Ran. He just outright seals the opponent's S3 since his debuff is so crippling against cleavers. For this same reason I stopped using Ran, as I mentioned before. I built him with destruction set, 22k HP, 350% critical damage and only around 150 speed, along with Azure Comet as my choice for the artifact. I built him this way since I only use him for his S2 and his S2 multiplier is really poor. Whenever someone dies and he proc his S2, he will get more than 40% combat readiness push. Combine that with his S3, he can potentially get 90% combat readiness push, which makes turn cycling with him actually pretty easy despite the speed. The second one is Celine. She is built with speed crit and gab to cut cleaves and potentially one-shoot them. She's usually picked when there's something that can stop my BBK from dealing damage, such as skills nulls from Flidica, FCC, or even Ran S3 that can strip my BBK if there's a book. In the case of Ran, she works in similar way as Edward. If Ran S3 into Celine, she will cut and more often than not, decimates the whole opponent's team. And the last but not least is Celine. You may realize she looks really different than the one I posted some time ago. She's built like this now because I started pre-banning Aravi, since dealing with her is just a headache without Ran in hand. Back at it, she is built decently fast at 261 speed right now, 20 less than where I want her to be, but she's fine as is. She is also using guide for the artifact and immunity set. This build allows me to deal with a hero that used to be a force ban for me, namely a Cid. I couldn't use Celine against him because of his pushback, silence and the soul erasing mechanic of his S3. But, with immunity, I can just tank the S3 without any problem. Guide serves as standalone FCC or Aureus. With this artifact, Celine takes 3 hits to kill instead of 2. It might not seem much, but this is really impactful in winning the game. She is usually picked on both my cleave team or anti-cleave team. On cleave team, I picked her whenever I don't think I can kill the opponent's heroes within 1 turn and I need to drag out the game to win. Usually this happens when there's both BBK and Chiron on the other side. On anti-cleave, she is picked whenever I see no possibility of 3 consecutive attack from opponent's side. Take for example, Cid plus a Cid, or Ran plus Cid. These 2 are really popular when it comes to cleaving. By having guide on Celine I can tank 2 hits from both of them, and an S3 from her would immediately seal the game since the opponent has no way to kill my team. This works because Celine with guide and immunity isn't a popular build. so people just let her go in draft phase thinking they can kill her. Moving on to my other situational picks. Let's talk about Senya. She is built with 25k HP, a little bit of defense and Elbrus. I built her this way because I only intend to use her against Cleavers. As I mentioned, you don't need 20k damage to kill him. Any damage is lethal to Cleavers, so 4k attack is more than enough for this purpose. She is picked whenever I see water heavy cleaves, especially the ones with Ida. With Elbrus she can disrupt a lot of cleaves even without moving. For example, more often than not, Ida's soul burn would be wasted because the Elbrus proc and Senya provoked her before she can S3. She also works great along with Cesarean because her tiny barrier is actually big enough to make Cesarean survive another hit, similar to Guide on Celine. Overall, Senya is just great to add that layer of RNG. Deliberate, she's the only cleanser I have that is currently built. If you haven't realized, I prefer taking debuffs head on and plan out my moves based on that rather than cleansing it. So, she's quite rarely picked unless the opponent's team consists of debuff heavy heroes, in which case I would pick her along with Edward. As you can see, her build is quite normal, or below average actually, but she's good enough for me to use. S10, again, nothing too different from typical S10s, she is picked quite a lot when there's little to no AoE on the other side. I love using her because my BBK and Rimuru can act as a tank to protect her. Meru, she is built with counter, some bulk and no speed. I pick her whenever I literally can't find a way to win. Her job is basically to just counter, counter and counter. She's just a pocket pick when I run out of a way to win. Celine, she's built with quite a lot of damage plus penetration set, and some speed allowing her to cut. I actually use her more in my cleave team than anti-cleave, since she's a bit too easy to work around, but I can guarantee her proc when cleaving against something like Elena. She's a great pocket pick for that, although a bit niche. And last but not least, Angel of Light Angelica. I actually built her 2 weeks before the season ended, and we all know how much of a cancer she is. Mine's built fairly slow with lots of bulk. Her job really is to just stand and make the opponent's life harder. And that's all the heroes I used for RTA. You might be wondering, what about all the heroes I used to use in my videos such as Jacko, Luna, Coli? Those are just picks for when I'm bored and there's free unequipped gear around. You might also be asking about some meta heroes you see in my roster such as FCC. Simply said, I hate drafting tanks. I can almost count the amount of times I drafted them last season with my fingers. I don't draft them because my teams are built tanky to begin with. Adding a tank would make me lack the damage needed to kill the opponent's heroes. So, that's really it when it comes to my RTA heroes. I will still show the stats on my built heroes, but I won't go in depth with their explanation. We have SSB here. She's used on my Wyvern 13 team but also doubles as my PvP pick. I just need to change her artifact to Bloodstone. Next, we have Carrot with Abyssal. I pick her sometimes in PvP content when I'm bored. Angelic Montmorency, my go-to healer for every PvE content. Fire Aiden, when I'm feeling Mimi in RTA. Funny enough, her win rate is actually good. She's also great in Guild War and Arena. I use her a lot actually. Summer Break Charlotte, she's my tank for Wyvern 13, her defense break is nice. Luna, she's the main DPS of my Wyvern 13 team. I prefer using her more than Sigrid. I changed her build to PvE oriented since I stopped using her in PvP. And that is all of them. My hunt teams share the same gears, so there's no point showing ungeared heroes. As you can see, it's a really bad account, really few meta heroes, and the gears are horrendous. So, if I can get to Emperor with some effort, I'm sure you people can do it too. All you really need is just take a step back and look wider at your pool of heroes. You'll find a lot of things you can use with some planning. That is all. Hope you like this cursed account review.